And I think in retrospect, that was a huge mistake because we could have done even more if we had raised our pricing and made more money and could have hired more people and not raising much capital and all those things.
How would you manage the risk of if you raise your prices, there was a mass exodus?
Pricing is hard because it's like stated versus revealed preferences. No one is ever going to tell you, oh yeah, you should definitely raise your prices.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Desmond, and today I'm excited to be sitting down with Ryan Delk. Ryan is the CEO and founder of Primer, a platform that helps the top 1% of teachers launch micro schools in their communities. And he spent the last decade building tech companies like Square, Gumroad, and Omni. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm curious to go very far back to the beginning. Your tech career started with an internship in Nairobi during college. What led you to that point?
Good question. So the year before I had done an internship in banking and I thought I wanted to go work on Wall Street or something misguided like that. And I spent the summer basically paper pushing for like small to medium sized small business loans, like $10 to $100 million small business loans. And I very quickly realized I didn't want to do that, not necessarily because the work was particularly soul sucking, but it was so unmeritocratic. And it was so, the career progressions were so linear. And there was actually one guy in particular he was probably, 30, and he was clearly so smart and so talented, significantly more so than his boss and his boss's boss. And it was like obvious to everyone and almost like this open secret. And I went out to lunch with him and he basically explained to me like every 2 years he gets a promotion. He just kind of works his way up. There was just something very off-putting about that to me, and that sort of being so beholden to this sort of cemented process of progression. And so the next summer, I just wanted to do something crazy, and so I decided to go to Nairobi and work on helping founders. And I mean, I didn't really know anything at that point, so I don't know how much help I was, but spent the summer working with founders, and we spun up a small venture fund there and invested in some companies, and just kind of like the polar opposite experience it's the craziest thing I could think of doing, and it was awesome.
It's incredible. And did you know at that point that you were going to go on and be a founder yourself, or were you still exploring and deciding your future direction?
No, I had no idea. Just a crazy thing to do in college, and it seemed like in terms of widening my own aperture, my own experiences and things I probably would not have the chance to do later on in life, it seemed like a good thing to do while you're still in school. And I think one insight I had in between the banking and the living in Africa was you can, especially when you're young, I started to realize that actually like the framework for risk that we are given or told is just quite miscalibrated, and you can actually take on way more risk when you're young than you think. And so that was part of why a lot of my friends were, trying to get internships at Goldman or Facebook or, whatever place. And it was pretty clear to me that it was not that giving up one summer of not doing that was like not that big of a deal. And so that was the driver of being willing to go spend a summer. And it actually was awesome. It was like ended up being super accretive to the things I ended up doing later in life, but also just from a human perspective, it was so much more valuable for me, and I learned so much more and expanded my view of the world so much more than I would have if I just done another internship, in San Francisco or something.
So true. It is really fascinating how at that stage in life, we feel often that we need to do a certain thing. We've got to go down this path. We need to get this particular internship. Actually, there's a lot more opportunity. And when you do something weird and different than everyone else, that actually sets you apart more than getting that Goldman internship perhaps would. Yeah. So after that, you went on to do an internship at Square for 9 months in the middle of their hypergrowth stage. I think you call yourself on LinkedIn an early nobody at Square, which is a great title. What was that like being there during that time of growth?
It was awesome. I was a nobody of all nobodies. I was working on trying to help Square get higher market penetration in college towns. So there's this program called Square U, and it was I think pretty good idea, which is basically college towns often have a higher percentage of indie and small merchants, whether it's restaurants or other small businesses. And they often don't have these like multi-location deals for the legacy credit card processors. And so in theory, the decision maker is sitting in the building somewhere and you could just go talk to them. And so the Square U program basic thesis was, could you get college kids to go be the sales team to go get all those people to switch to Square? And in theory, that would be easier than, like the enterprise sales team reaching out to these big multi-location franchises and operators. And so I think it was like moderately successful, not super successful, but the density of talent was quite good. And so I think Keith Raboy has this quote that like the program itself, in terms of how much GMV it added to Square, was not that consequential, but the level of talent that it brought in, and then those people's subsequent impact at Square made it a home run. It was super fun. I mean, I learned a ton, and I was able to see what true in terms of operating a tech company. That period was about as good as it gets.
It's amazing. And that's interesting because now you are, to a certain extent, the person who's operating multiple locations, but you are working with individual teachers to start those locations. What did you learn from that time trying to scale these small businesses at Square that you apply to your work today?
I don't know how much it applies to the specific location aspect, but the quality bar at Square for almost everything, but certainly anything that was design, product, comms, was extremely high. And that was clear regardless of where you sat in the org, even if you were at the absolute bottom of the totem pole. So I think that was probably the most important lesson that I took away, is that even as you're scaling and hiring a bunch of people, it is possible to maintain a seemingly impossible quality bar for these things. And that was mostly a testament to the executive team, but it was carried out by and carried forward by a lot of the kind of mid-level managers and new hires that bought in, and then kind of carried the torch forward.
How do you think about that in the context of a high growth company? Because you want to move fast, but then you also want to maintain high quality. What's the balance between those two?
There's always trade-offs, but I do think that people probably underestimate how good the best people in the world, someone who's truly top 1% of what they do, how high of a quality bar they can hit and still maintain a reasonable speed. It also depends a lot on your industry. If you're in payments or education, healthcare, these sorts of things,
you need to.
Dropping the ball
can
be extremely expensive to you, to your customers, to your brand, etc. There's plenty of other, if Instagram goes down for 30 minutes, that's like lost revenue for Facebook and some frustrated customers. But if if Square was down for 30 minutes and the payment processing network was down, that could be, depending on the hour of the day, that could be like not making rent for a small business owner or something, if it was like a peak weekend hour. And so I think I think you have to have a different posture towards quality bars and speed, depending on the type of business it is. But I do think people underestimate how fast really great people can move while still also maintaining a really high quality bar.
Which brings me to an interesting thread that I've seen across your career, which is the people. It seems like you place a really high emphasis on bringing in the right people, and a lot of the rest solves for itself. How did you first start in that? Where did you first start seeing talent be such an important piece of the equation?
Probably the most valuable thing I learned from Keith, who was also the first investor in Primer, was the only real way to create a talent advantage at an early stage company is to learn how to both attract and then evaluate and close undiscovered talent. And there's a bunch of different dimensions that could make someone undiscovered, but the two easiest ones would be age. So you're hiring people earlier in their career, so you're hiring people that dropped out of college or new grads that are really exceptional, and you're giving them far more responsibility and allowing them to make a far bigger impact than they would ordinarily make at that age. Or people from non-traditional backgrounds. So someone who didn't go to Stanford, maybe someone who spent their career so far working in, one of the best engineers I've ever worked with was working for the city of Salt Lake City. And he was an engineer on the team there working on, like parks and recs websites and different things, and then building all these projects in his spare time. And he was self-taught, and he was incredible. And he went on to be, I think at one point he was the highest level IC engineer at Coinbase, to give you, since this is not just my evaluation, this is, very well established at this point. And at that point at Coinbase, I believe he was like 6 years out from or 5 years out from working literally on government projects for a city in Utah. So you have to get really good at discovering, figuring out how to attract and evaluate undiscovered talent, because otherwise you're just going to be competing for all the same people that every other company that has far more money, far more resources than you, a liquid stock that they can use as basically cash comp. So I just became obsessed with that problem. And so I think in terms of attracting those people, you have to build a reputation to be the type of person that is willing to give irrational amounts of responsibility to people that most people would assume have not earned that responsibility, because truly great people who are young or undiscovered or for whatever reason, they're not currently in that position at a company, they want to come in and have an impact. And so you need to build a reputation of the type of person that's willing to take bets on people. And that means there's risk. So you're going to hire people that you think and give them a bunch of responsibility that you think are exceptional. They're going to hit the edge of their responsibility. And then you have to decide how you handle that. And if you handle that by berating them, firing them, et cetera, then you are unlikely to become a top destination for people who are undiscovered talent. Now, this is not someone who is, working in the core competency of their job and not performing. That's a totally different thing. I'm talking about when you bring on someone exceptional that's maybe, they're college dropout and they're really, really strong, and you give them this really hard technical project and you let them lead it and they're, doing amazing. So then you give them maybe a bigger project and then a bigger project and then that third bigger project. You're increasing the surface area of their responsibility or the significance of their responsibility. They kind of hit that outer edge of their competency and they, fumble a big meeting or they miss a deadline or whatever the thing might be. That is the moment where your reputation is going to be built. And if you help that person recognize what's happening, you put it in terms that doesn't make it, if it's a 19-year-old who's done a bunch of exceptional work and then they hit the edge of their competency, that is the moment where all their growth is going to happen. That's a huge moment for you as a leader to jump in and help frame that growth. And so you have to be willing to give them responsibility and let them hit the edge of their competency. And then you also have to be really good at evaluating those people when they do come into your Twitter DMs or your cold emails or whatever. And that is quite difficult because all the normal signals where someone went to college, their career track record, whatever, are not going to apply to these people. And so it's all gut instinct or an interview process that can help illuminate whether or not they do have whatever the thing you're looking for that role or for the culture that you're building. So I think if you can get good at those two things, then you have a huge talent advantage over everyone else. And there's almost nothing besides choosing a great market. There's almost nothing that you can do to increase your odds of success in a startup more than building a great team.
And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. And if I think about someone listening to this who's maybe building a team, loves the idea of bringing in undiscovered talent, one of the fears that could come up is, what do I do when they do make a mistake? That's going to take more of my time to manage them. If I have 3 or 4 of these people on my team, now that's almost overwhelming the amount of time that I might need to help when they hit the edge of their competency. How do you manage that without running out of your own time?
I think if that's the case, then you've hired the wrong people. So you still need exceptional people. So you should not be lowering the goal is not to lower the talent bar. The goal is to find people that hit your talent bar through either backgrounds or entry points into the organization that would be non-traditional or that other people might miss. And so if you're trying to hire for senior software engineers and you're just looking at people that have worked at Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon with 10 years of experience and graduated from MIT or Stanford, that is a extremely well-priced and highly priced class of employees. And everyone on the planet knows how to evaluate that talent. And so if you're evaluating and recruiting from those same pool of people, there's no way to build a structural advantage there. But if you're able to source that same talent bar from other places or other types of people, and I don't mean countries or necessarily, I mean just other pockets of talent that didn't go to Stanford or didn't go to MIT, that's how you can build the structural advantage. So if you're spending a bunch of your time, managing through mistakes, then those are just crappy employees that need to be fired. So the goal is to find these people that can hit the talent bar, but are just from maybe a slightly untraditional path.
And how do you evaluate that difference between someone who is non-traditional and is going to be a really high performer and someone who may just not be such a great employee?
I think it's obvious. Yeah, I think it's never not been obvious to me. Maybe for a week or two or some very short period of time, you're sort of unsure if it's someone just getting their feet under them, but I think it's almost always obvious very quickly if someone is on a very high growth trajectory and working through some growing pains, and you can confidently keep pushing them and they're going to keep succeeding, or if they just don't have what it takes.
When someone enters your Twitter DMs, do you feel like you recognize immediately this is a person I should hire or not? Or is there some principle that you take to identify these people?
I generally know within 5 minutes into a conversation, not over text, but if I'm meeting them in person. I always prefer in person over Zoom, but it's pretty quick.
It's amazing. Has it always been that way for you? Or is that something that...
No. Early on, I would go through a much more formulaic evaluation, and then you learn to kind of tune your gut over time to where you can pick up on all the leading indicators of what the formulaic evaluation would give you. And so certainly there's people that surprise me and, aren't as predictable, but I think most of the time, pretty quickly.
It's amazing. If there's someone listening to this, let's say a CMO at their organization, and they want to grow better at reaching non-traditional talent, what would be the 2 or 3 things they can do to start?
Build a reputation of start attracting those kind of people by talking about it and making it clear that that's the kind of organization that you're building. Take bets on people and give them irrational amounts of responsibility if they're truly exceptional. So I'm not talking about someone who's already struggling and giving them, that's not what I'm talking about. But someone who, if you have that like 1 or 2 people in your org, like this person is truly like has the potential to be world-class, one of the top 100 best people in the world at the thing they do, then be willing to keep giving them a lot more authority and important projects. And then work to take bets on a lot of new undiscovered talent that comes in as you start attracting those folks, and builds some relatively operationalized funnel and either roles that you're willing to fill those with, or types of projects you're willing to give them. Like City Launcher, some companies like that are doing geographic expansion. City Launcher is a perfect example of this because it's a role that there's some skill set that is required, but it's really like, how hard are you willing to work? And are you willing to do you have a really good gut instinct on where to prioritize, understanding supply and demand, figuring out which parts of the geo to spend most of your time on. And so it's a great role for someone who's kind of an up and comer to cut their teeth. And you can easily give someone a small market that's less consequential and see how they do. And then if they crush it, you can keep giving them more and more important markets. So there's depending on the shape of the organization, there's different roles that are probably particularly good fits for these sorts of people.
That's awesome. And you've written before about the importance of barrels in a team. What is a barrel and how do you bring that in?
It's another thing I stole from or learned from Keith Raboy. Basic framing is that there are 2 kinds of people in organizations. There are people like barrels that you can, the way to think about it is you could give that person a relatively complex either project or goal or some important thing in the organization. And you can be confident that they are going to get everything organized, figure out what throughput needs to happen to hit it, manage the process to get there. Ideally, they're the type of person that's sort of going to will it into existence, whatever it takes. And these people are quite rare. In my experience, a lot of founders think they have a bunch of barrels on their team, and they have like half as many or a quarter as many as what they think, because these people that can truly do this are almost always end up becoming founders. And so it's like very difficult to retain them for a long period of time because it's such a valuable and unique skill that if you have it, it's rare to stick around at an organization for many, many years. And then you have other people in organizations, to say bullets, there's a bunch of different analogies you can use that are great people at just, getting things done, and you give them a linear set of tasks and they just, go crush through them. But those people need to be paired with barrels that can get everything organized and be ultimately responsible for delivering whatever the outcome is for the organization. And when you find those people, they're incredibly valuable. And so they should make tons of money, have tons of equity. You should keep giving them more and more responsibility, because they're essentially the mechanism by which all progress happens at every startup. And therefore, the way a lot of progress for humanity happens are through these people. So we all owe them many, many debts of gratitude. And if you can think of people that you've worked with that embody this.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to an employee who maybe is right now more of a bullet, but wants to be a barrel? Is that a skill that can be learned, and how would they go about becoming a barrel?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't really know. I would assume that it's possible, but there does seem to be some sort of innate quality that I've noticed in these sorts of people that are the sort of like will it into existence attitude is very common. and I'm unsure that that can be taught. So I don't know. That's a good question. I assume that it would be. I think it's probably possible, but it's probably possible. But it will. There's probably, like most things, there's a subset of people to which it's just their natural operating tendency, and then there's a subset of people who can do it, but they have to consciously try to do it. And my guess is that that's people used to talk about this about playing with Kobe Bryant. Like he only had one speed in terms of training and intensity, and it was just the way his whole being operated at that frequency. And there's plenty of other players that played with him that said, hey, I could train that hard, and I could push myself that hard, and I could become that intense, but I would have to consciously make the decision to go do that. It wasn't just a natural frequency that I lived my life at. And so it's obviously possible to be. You can look at many great NBA players that did not have anywhere near his level of intensity, or work ethic, or any other dimension you wanted to pick. So it's obviously possible to, yes. So I revise my answer. Yes, I think it's possible, but it's probably just that they have to specifically observe what the characteristics are and then go actively try to do it, versus other people where it just comes naturally to them.
And you have, I believe, an unusual number of founders on your team currently. How do you attract these founders, and how do you convince them to stay at your company rather than going out and spinning off their own?
Primary thing is just the mission. I think you hear a lot of people complain about the quality of education in the US. There's a lot of people that it's very popular to have a hot take on Twitter about education, how it's broken and what needs to be different and whatever. But there's very few people actually doing anything about it. And I think that anytime you have a problem that is universally-ish acknowledged, but very few people doing anything about it, when you come across if it's something that you care about, when you come across an organization that's actually doing something about it, that goes a very long way in terms of your own resonance with the work that you're doing, how hard you're willing to work, how committed you are to the company, to the team. And so I think in some ways, what we're trying to do is extremely hard, but one part of it that is very easy is convincing very talented people to come work on Primer, because the mission resonates so well, and particularly resonates people who have kids, which often correlates with people who might be more senior later in their career. Maybe they founded a company, sold it, and they're kind of figuring out what's next, or founded a company, wound it down, and they're figuring out what's next. And those people, are often exceptional, often barrels, and they're often exceptional. And Primer's mission really resonates with them.
That's incredible. So rewinding the clock, I want to go back earlier in your career. You finished at Square, and you led growth and partnerships at Gumroad, which is to this day a really interesting company that allows people to sell things on the internet. What was that experience like, going from a massive company that was growing very fast to a much smaller company that's also growing fast, but where you're one of the few people who's actually driving that growth?
Yeah, I was very lucky to feel very, very grateful for my time there. I really had no idea what I was doing, but I knew how to work really hard, and I knew the basic mechanics of how sales and growth should work. And I think I had a pretty good intuition for the types of things that would be accretive to the company versus the types of things that would be a waste of time. I definitely wasn't perfect. And I think that over time, it got better. But we were able to successfully kind of, dominate might be a little bit of an aggressive term, but we were able to successfully kind of own this indie creator like movement before it was sort of a thing. And to this day, I don't have any inside knowledge anymore, but that was the majority of GMV most months, the majority of revenue. And a lot of that was just kind of like pure hustle with, meeting people, and, people I would cold email, and Hacker News, they would launch a, new book or something, and I would cold email them and say, hey, like, you should, use Gumroad instead of whatever you're using for this. And so I learned a ton about growth, sales, marketing, high quality growth versus low quality growth, pricing. We should have raised our prices way earlier. Yeah. And that was like where I kind of really cut my teeth. And kind of was able to break into the tech world and San Francisco. So super grateful for it.
I'm going to go deeper on pricing, because I've noticed this come up in a few of the conversations I've had so far. What's your thesis on how companies should approach pricing?
So I don't know that I have I could give you some hot takes, but I don't know that I've thought too deeply on pricing. As there's a broadly applicable advice, but at least to the extent that Gumroad is a useful example to learn from, we were we were primarily competing with a bunch of people that either took 30% of every sale or 10% of every sale. Those were sort of like the two price points that we were competing with. And we priced Gumroad at 5% of every sale. And so it was sort of we made it basically this no-brainer. But the problem was that our spread, we would pay a payment processor to process the transactions, and our volume wasn't high enough yet to get really good pricing. And so we were still paying I don't remember specifically, but let's say like 2.25 or 2.5 cents per transaction. And so we were only, our revenue was, depending on the size of the transaction, was like between 1% and 2% of the total transaction after you backed out, cost of merchant processing. And I think we wanted to position ourselves as this no-brainer product. Plus, I think we had this, feeling of like, oh, well, if people could just go build a version of this themselves on top of their own, they could use Braintree or Stripe or whoever and build their own version of Gumroad. And we did have kind of like a disproportionate number of technical users. And so there was kind of always this thing in the back of our head. And I think in retrospect, that was a huge mistake because we were doing so much for so much beyond just the payments. And we could have done even more if we had raised our pricing and made more money and could have hired more people and not raised as much capital and all those things. And I think I think it was mostly a position of fear of not wanting to create too wide of a spread between what we perceived to be an alternative, which was just building it yourself. When in reality, I think I don't have any inside knowledge, but I do know that the company, after they raised their prices, which was after I left, is doing very, very well or relatively well. And I don't believe there was any mass exodus of folks that were building their own version of Gumroad, because it turns out that actually maintaining that is a lot of work, and for a few points on a transaction, it's not actually worth doing that. And you're still way better than all the alternatives that are charging 30 or 10%. So I wish we'd done that earlier. And I don't know how illustrative that is. My friend Patrick McKenzie, Patio11 on Twitter, says you should always just raise your prices, and whatever your prices are, you should increase them. I don't know if how good that advice is universally, but I know a lot of people have strong opinions along those lines, and we probably could have heeded that advice a little earlier.
How would you manage the risk of, if you raise your prices, there was a mass exodus? What would be the risk mitigation in that sort of instance?
I don't know. I mean, we definitely had a very tight relationship with a lot of our users. Like, they would come by the office all the time. I was constantly talking to them. And so I think we would have had a pretty good pulse on how it was going to go. We could have rolled it out or gotten a bunch of feedback on it. But pricing is hard because it's like stated versus revealed preferences. No one is ever going to tell you, oh yeah, you should definitely raise your prices. And everyone's going to tell you, oh, I'll leave if you do this, or I'll find an alternative or whatever. But that's obviously fine to say. But then when the rubber meets the road, are they actually going to go do that? Who knows? But there are plenty of companies that you can point to that screwed up pricing, and it cost them hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in enterprise value. So it's not unheard of. But I don't know. I'm not a pricing guru, so I don't know. Probably don't have any sufficiently exciting hot takes on how to think about pricing.
Super fair. I'm curious to go deeper into this time at Gumroad. You're growing. You mentioned reaching out to people who were on Hacker News and just asking them, hey, come over to Gumroad. What other mechanisms or channels, if you had channels at the time, were driving growth successfully at that initial stage?
There was, I think there's strong word of mouth growth, I think, in the indie creator world, and then in the more traditional entertainment world. I think what we did a good job of was in both of those circles. So we had, on the indie side, we had a lot of the, people that were selling ebooks or courses or, I don't know, like software plugins, things like that. And then we had Justin Bieber and Coldplay and Bon Jovi and Eminem and, all these big artists that used us to sell their music and merch and different things. And I think we did a good job in both of those circles, where there was eventually some FOMO of we were sort of like the thing that everyone wanted to be using and the cool thing to be using. And I think and we actually did that without really any huge brand. Like, we didn't have like a massive marketing team. We didn't have like CMOs and people that were working on all sorts of, big brand campaigns. And so actually we did quite a good job of that. And it was mostly through word of mouth and just the reputation that we built. And the team was truly stacked. I think if you look at if you look at the first 15 or 20 hires at Gumroad, first 15 hires, I don't know offhand the specific numbers, but more than half of them are founders of very successful companies now, and are many of them are backed by all the top top VC funds and building really exciting things. So I do think the talent density was very, very high, and that contributed to having a great product with a very small team, which allowed us to grow pretty quickly in those verticals.
When you talk about people like Bieber being on the platform, was that something you saw as a marketing lever and actually you were losing money on these celebrities? Or is that actually just like that was the business and the celebrities would pay the same price as anyone else and it still grew despite that?
I don't think that we ever, you should fact check me on this if you have anyone else from Gumroad on the podcast. I don't think we ever decreased pricing for anyone. It's possible that we did, but that was like a pretty hard and fast rule that we just never decreased pricing. So I don't think we ever changed our pricing for anyone. So from a gross margin perspective, no, we wouldn't have lost money on anyone. There was certainly, in certain instances, there was definitely customers that drove so much traffic and it was, kind of an all hands on deck. Like I remember Eminem I think he launched an album. I don't remember the specific details, but I think he launched a new album and it was exclusive to Gumroad for a week or a day or some period of time. And I don't remember, he has 200 million people across all the socials. And we didn't even know it was happening. And we just, the site goes down or some load balance or something, someone gets a notification. And there was I don't remember the numbers, but for 20,000 concurrent people trying to, purchase something. And so you end up spending a ton of resources to support that. So certainly there was a lot of costs that we incurred to support the bigger creators. And I think that I don't know that it was a mistake, but we spent a lot of energy on them and it was not a super sustainable, it was the indie side of it ended up being far more sustainable and durable versus I think the traditional side of it would have required growing the team sort of commensurate with revenue, similar to like an enterprise sales team versus kind of building a self-sustaining engine like you could on the indies.
That's actually really interesting. So these sort of big launches where you get tons of people at once, you're like Black Friday sale type thing, you'd actually recommend avoiding over-reliance on that and focus more on the stuff that just drives every single day?
I wouldn't say that. I don't think there's a good or a bad. I just think it's a different kind of business. So I think if we wanted to continue to grow in the traditional entertainment world, we would have needed to continue to hire people to go own those relationships, have a director of music, director of film, director of publishing, all those roles. And there's probably a good business to be built there. And then on the other side of it, you have this long tail of creators that's very low churn and generally not very fussy and doesn't have a bunch of, specific qualification. I remember one famous hip hop artist that will remain nameless didn't like the radius of the corners of the buy button. And so that was one of the conditions for using Gumroad would be that it would be a different angle on the buy button. And so there's just, a lot of that you don't have to deal with on the long tail of creators.
That's fair. Different businesses. Which brings me to a different business that you were at, Omni. You were the VP of product and growth, and I believe at the end you were the COO at Omni. What was your experience building this company, getting in at the ground floor, and then eventually selling it to Coinbase?
Yeah, it was very fun and a lot of very hard lessons. The thesis of Omni was in every city in the US, you have basically a bunch of redundant, high quality goods. If you think about, the peak utilization of those goods, it is never above 5-10% of the total supply in a city. So if you think about the number of people that have really high-end mountain bikes or really high-end tents or, pick your thing, surfboards, car dock carriers, whatever. And so the idea was build a storage business that people pay for storage, but then you can monetize by allowing people to rent out things that they want to have access to. So if you want access to a $15,000 mountain bike, you can just rent that on the weekends that you want it and Omni delivers it to you. And so the two lessons I learned. One was this was a problem that I had and that I wanted to always have access to the highest quality things and be able to, but I didn't want to have to own all this stuff and store it. And you're in a city, it's kind of obnoxious to have all this stuff around. And I loved the pick up and drop off component of it. And so one lesson I learned is, just because you want something, that is a necessary but not sufficient condition, I think, for starting a great company and for leading a great company. It needs to be, I think in most cases, a problem that you personally care a lot about and have experienced, but that's not enough. And so the second issue I learned is that unit economics and gross margin are just that's the physics of business. And we spent so much energy trying to get the unit economics to work. And my basic conclusion was that someone was going to build a massive business doing this, but it will happen post self-driving cars, because customers were obsessed with the product, and we had, we were growing very quickly, but the challenge was that Amazon and many other companies had normalized either free or like $2.99 or $4.99 delivery. And so for same day orders, our actual cost on average to get an item from our warehouse to a customer, we got it down to, I think, like 1060 or 1070 or something. And that was with hiring, very, very senior folks from Amazon that worked on their routing and logistics algorithms and their warehouse management, and like a year and a half of just going, very, very hard at this problem. And we couldn't get it to the point where the unit economics would work. And so we ended up selling the company to Coinbase, and ended up being, a good outcome for the team. And actually kind of a reasonable outcome for a lot of the investors, because of sort of when we were able to do that deal, and Coinbase's rise afterwards. But certainly not the outcome that the investors hoped for, that we hoped for, when we started the business. So yeah, learned a lot. Was super fun. I love businesses that involve atoms. Like it's very hard for me to work on pure software problems. And so, yeah, it was a very fun period getting to try to solve a very hard problem.
It's incredible. And it's fascinating how Amazon's free delivery, which is a moat for them in e-commerce that they subsidize through the rest of their e-commerce business, has this sort of spillover effect into industries that they don't even intend. That's fascinating.
Don't get me started.
So coming back to Omni, you said storage at one point was the Trojan horse for rentals. How did you build that out? Was that intentional, or was that a pivot at some point during the company's history?
No, that was the vision from day one. So it was build the storage business to get, so we got, I don't know, 1 million, 2 million items or something in the San Francisco market. And then we turned on rentals with all the best items. And it was sweet. I mean, we had people storing like, Picasso lithographs and every high-end mountain bike you could ever imagine. And, if you wanted almost anything, you could get, like, we had people that would send us these stories of like the just incredible parties that they were able to host, with all this amazing art. And they would rent like, really, really, really cool furniture for parties or for weddings or different events. And then people that were into outdoor stuff, like you could get anything you would need for any sort of, Bay Area outdoor, weekend you could get. So it was awesome. And the product was really good, but the unit economics were just so tough.
That is so cool. What was your
The other interesting lesson from that was people would give us, it was such an incredible look into human psychology, because people would give us they would store like a $5,000 road bike or something, and it would sit there, sit for a year, and they would bring it back. They would have it delivered back, and we would deliver it back, and they would write in and complain. They'd be like, why is this dusty? And in my head, I'm thinking like, well, you just stored, this thing's been in storage for, a year. Obviously it's dusty. But the way the psychology works, you expect this premium experience for it to come back to you in the exact same condition as it did. So we literally at one point we had so many bikes coming in and out that we hired dedicated bike folks that knew how to tune up bikes, and made sure that every bike going out the door was like in perfect condition, ready to ride. And so it was just such an interesting look into sort of like the irrational nature of human psychology. And then, on the other side of it, our poor, warehouse and logistics team was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, how could they possibly expect this? But we were obsessed with trying to figure out how to delight all the customers. So it was really fun.
That is really cool. That is really, really cool. How did you drive your first few customers at Omni?
I wasn't there from like the very beginning, so I don't know, but I think I don't remember exactly how many customers we had when I joined, but it was in probably the low, less than 100 or less than a couple hundred. But I think it was mostly word of mouth early on. We would get really good geographic density in high-end apartment, like multifamily buildings. And so we actually built this flow where people could, it was like very easy for the actual logistics folks to onboard new customers while they were out doing scheduled pickup and drop-offs. And so that was actually very, very successful, because they would be out, delivering a bike or picking up a bike or delivering a surfboard or whatever. And someone would stop them and say, hey, what do you, and like, oh, this, they would kind of give the Omni pitch. And so we actually incentivized them. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but we had some sort of commission structure where they could basically earn a pretty significant amount of additional revenue or income by converting customers while they were out. And that was actually quite successful.
That's really cool. So you were getting a lot of customers through the logistics team. How would people sign up if, like, I saw a logistics person? Do I sign up on my phone, or how would that process actually work?
I don't remember how it worked. I think I don't remember. I think there was some. It was like QR code to app download, and there was some sort of like way to jump them through the initial onboarding to just very quickly get their items, payment info, and contact info, and then we would sort of create a lightweight account.
It's incredible. So even that same day, you could take their stuff and check it in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing. That's amazing. Did you do any paid acquisition, or was it so successful through these lighter lift things that you just didn't need to invest more in marketing?
We did some, but storage is a very, very well saturated market for paid acquisition. So we could never hit, I think in some niche segments we would hit our target CAC, but in general it's very difficult to hit our target CAC.
Fair. And you ended your time there as a COO. I'm curious, as a COO, what do you think marketers most often misunderstand about the wider context of a company?
Probably, the way I always think about businesses is, I think every business, or at least every good business, can be reduced down to some equation. And so you can build an equation in your head of what all the inputs for success or for how the business is doing. And I think the growth function or marketing function needs to very clearly understand that equation in order to understand, as they are acquiring and growing customers and growing the business, what are the physics of the business and where is the enterprise value actually being created? Because I think that the very common failure state in marketing is we're really good at acquiring users, but they're really low gross margin and they churn, or they end up being super unprofitable because they're, this behavior is different from this channel and we don't fully understand that. And so there's a lot of really bad myopic marketers out there that don't understand how to view the full equation of the business and how marketing fits into that.
That makes sense. Maximizing for the wrong thing. So understanding that full business equation allows you to maximize the end result rather than a stage that may not actually feed to the end result. After the chapter at Omni, you then started Primer. But before you started Primer, I think you've said you actually looked for someone else to start it. Why did you not want to start this company yourself?
It's a really hard thing to build. Because the origin was really that I was looking for something like this for my own kids, or knew that I would want it for my own kids. My kids were, I think my oldest was 2 that time. And I just thought that I would, invest in it and help find a great founder and have them go build it. And I'll be the first investor and help them raise capital. But yeah, I talked to a bunch of founders and they all, why would I? That sounds terrible. I'd rather go build another HR SaaS app or something. So yeah, it was pretty clear at some point that if this was going to exist, I need to go do it. And so, yeah, then we were off to the races. And once I got to that point, there was sort of past the point of no return.
And did it come from your background being homeschooled yourself for part of your schooling, or was there another reason for wanting to start this type of company?
Well, we were in San Francisco at the time, and the education, San Francisco is not atypical, in this regard, but the education system in America is especially in big cities, is basically a duopoly between very high-end private schools, and there's, arguably there's a subsection there which is less expensive but very low quality education, religious schools, which is a broad generalization but directionally true, or a very mixed bag of public schools, of which the majority are not very good. And there's a few gems, but it's either impossible to get in those, or it's some sort of lottery system that's very convoluted, or some combination of the above. And so I was just sort of shocked as I learned about what the as it was like the rubber meet the road, and we were going through the process, and this is insane. This is, completely, like anyone who was just objectively looking at the system would say this is totally broken. And I knew that, passively, but I hadn't personally experienced it. And it was, the shocking thing to me was, we looked at the traditional system and private schools and public schools, and I just assumed, okay, there has to be this third thing, because my mom basically started a micro school for us at that point 23 years earlier or something. So surely those are ubiquitous now. Like, it was obviously superior education, so surely that's what everyone's doing, or at least there's a version of that in every city. And I was just shocked that didn't exist. And there's obviously a bunch of there's hundreds of them, or probably thousands of them, that are these ad hoc sort of one-off little setups. But if you want to set up one on your own, there was no network or no platform or no software. There's no equivalent to Stripe for launching a micro school. And there was no network that made it really easy. And so that was sort of the seed that eventually became Primer, was like that experience and going through that myself.
When you did launch, I believe you initially started online, which is how a lot of education tech companies start, but then you pivoted to offline as your primary model. How did that pivot come apart?
It's actually always the plan. So in our very first, like in our memo for our seed fundraise, micro schools were always the end state. We were initially, the very condensed version is initially launch the best place on the internet for ambitious kids to connect with each other, work on projects, get geographic density in major cities around those, for those kids, a combination of homeschool, traditional school, any type of current education, and then launch micro schools to serve those kids. The key insight that I had, and the thing and that sounds really good, and I like it a lot. I still like it as an idea because I really like interesting distribution hacks and the ability to get a bunch of potential kids for, on potential students that are onto the Primer, sort of digital platform, and then be able to then let them know, hey, this micro school is launching in your area, and have, in theory, zero CAC for those students is awesome. And that would be very powerful from a distribution perspective. But the challenge that I underestimated and the key lesson that I learned was that you have the team, the type of company you're building, the shape of the team, the skill set of the team, it's very different based on the type of company you're building. And I knew this obviously at the conceptual level, but as I started to realize when we, as the online version of the product was taking off and we started to work on micro schools, I realized how different that team needed to look in order to succeed in micro schools, that you were effectively going to have to build two separate companies. I don't mean that literally, but in terms of the skill sets, it's so different. So building one successful product and one successful company is you already had the odds stacked far against you as an early stage company. And so it became clear that it was just delusional. We already had the entire incumbent education machine trying to kill us. It made no sense to make all that harder by taking on all this additional complexity, especially because we had these two key insights. The first was that teachers are actually incredible entrepreneurs and they can actually go recruit students very successfully to join their schools. And the second was there's huge tailwind that was happening post-COVID of parents that were furious about the current system and the ways that it was failing their kids. In some cases, that was because the schools were closed. In some cases, that was because they did online school and they got a firsthand vantage point into what school was like. And they were basically like, hey, I will do anything to find an alternative to this. And so it was clear that there was a moment for us to sort of capitalize on. And then that's when we went all in on micro schools.
Coming back to what you mentioned about teachers being good entrepreneurs, how did you discover this? And are all teachers good entrepreneurs, or are there certain teachers that are particularly well suited?
So this is really interesting. So when we launched the first micro school, one of our teachers, her name was April, and she's still crushing it, leading an amazing Primer in South Florida. Talking to her was like talking to a founder, and she's not going to go raise a $5 million seed round for a company, but she is an entrepreneur. She had a vision for this community. She wanted to launch a school in this community. She knew the community well. She had been teaching there for, 15, 20 years. And she went out and had students lined up out the door to enroll in her school. And she just needed the software platform to give her the curriculum and the regulatory approval and all those things to be able to operate. But she was like ready to go. And that was sort of like the key moment for me when I realized there is something untapped here. And teachers, and to go even further, I think teachers often feel in the current system like they are not just, there's like undervalued, underappreciated, all those things people talk about all the time, but actually underutilized. Like they actually feel like they have skill sets that are far beyond what is asked of them in the traditional system. And so what we find is that often when you put them in the seat of founding a micro school, they end up really rising to the occasion and doing incredible work. And that goes far beyond the core, education part of it, because actually like being a teacher is not that different than being like a small business entrepreneur. If you think about it, I mean, they're constantly dealing with parents, oftentimes frustrated, angry parents, which happen to be not that different than frustrated and angry customers and doing customer support. They are managing budgets. They are managing timelines. They have this sort of small, group of 15 or 30, or in some cases, public schools, 40, 45 students that they have to manage every day. And it's just not that different. And so when you find these really high agency, exceptional teachers and you say, hey, do you want to partner with us to launch a primer? They rise to the occasion and they crush it.
I want to go deeper on this thing you just mentioned, high agency. For people who may not be familiar with the term, because this also goes back to where you're talking earlier about barrels. What is high agency and how would people become better at being high agency?
The simplest definition would be believing that there is that you have an internal locus of control and your actions, living your life in such a way that you believe your actions can have a significant impact on everything outside of you. And some of that is how you communicate and carry yourself and do your work, but also it's the types of things that you choose to spend your time on. And I think a lot of these teachers feel like they operate day to day in a very low agency environment where they're in crippling bureaucracy. They're dealing with mountains of paperwork, oftentimes spending hours on weekends, so underpaid, during the week. And then they're spending their weekends doing paperwork. And the reality is most teachers love teaching, but they hate being teachers. They hate the profession of being a teacher because it's not actually really about teaching anymore. It's about all the administrative and bureaucratic and, this sort of suffocating, structure that we've placed around education. And so primer in many ways is saying teachers are amazing. They're really good at what they do. Let's put them in an environment where they can be in the driver's seat. They can deliver an incredible education and facilitate an incredible education with the assistance of software, technology, and AI tutors and virtual teachers and learning apps and all sorts of other resources around them. And let's peel away this whole administrative bureaucracy layer so they spend zero time doing paperwork. We automate almost all of the administration of the school, and then we free them up to do what they love, which is spending all day interacting with students, talking to parents, investing in their lives, connecting with them. And it turns out that's actually what most teachers want.
Which is interesting how closely that parallels Stripe in a different world. That you're sort of bringing this automation and this ease to the education world in a way that would be very hard to navigate as an individual. Most small companies operate within what's currently possible and leave the regulation change to the bigger companies. You've actually changed regulations in Florida in a pretty meaningful way. What led you to tackle such a very difficult problem, and how did you find that process go?
Yeah, the simplest explanation is I got so frustrated with the inane and senseless bureaucracy that we were dealing with to open these schools. And I had heard from so many people that were trying to open schools, and it wasn't impossible. It was way too difficult, way more difficult than it should be. And so the very quick overview of this is in order to open a school, there's a variety of different approvals you need to get from local land use, zoning, building, fire, health, life safety. And there's also state level approvals to the Department of Education. So Primer's mission is to decrease the friction for launching a new school. It's never going to be zero, but we wanted to get it as for new teachers. We wanted to be able to launch schools as quickly as possible in these communities that they want to serve. And so to do that, we need to get really good at navigating these regulations on their behalf. So similar to how when you sign up for Stripe as a developer, you're not having to go learn about all the PCI compliance, laws in your country and next tax nexus and all these things. You just trust that Stripe has figured it out. And that's what we want Primer to be. And so as I was learning more about these processes, the specific thing that the moment that I realized that we were going to go do this was when I spoke with someone who had dealt with it for a variety of reasons. I won't go into the specifics, but a particularly absurd regulation related to, we were encountering this regulation around traffic studies in school bus pickup and drop off for schools. And we run micro schools. So we're talking 20 students. There's no school buses. There's no traffic impacts, zero. And we were being required, the teacher that was trying to launch the school was going to be required to do like a $10,000 traffic study in order to open her school because that was just the law for schools. And I was speaking with someone about this and you could tell in their eyes that they totally understood that it was absurd, but that they were so desensitized to the absurdity because it was the status quo that it was like they just knew that this was how it was going to be forever. And that was the moment where I decided we have to like, there's no way this is going to stay this way. And so we wrote and passed two different laws in Florida in back-to-back legislative sessions. And the net result of that is that it, for about 50,000 parcels of land across Florida, it created a by right state level preemption for by right use, private school use for K through 12 education of these pieces of land, regardless of what the local zoning is. So even if the local zoning says you can't have a school there, it doesn't matter. There's a state level preemption and they have to approve that use by right. And so that, for obvious reasons, made it way easier for us to expand across Florida. And luckily, Florida is uniquely bad in this regard. Most other states are quite good. But Florida was particularly bad. And we were able to, it didn't solve, it's not a panacea, but it moved the ball forward pretty significantly.
It's incredible. And if I remember correctly, at that time, you almost open sourced this regulation and said, anyone else who wants to do this in your state, here's the stuff, you can take it and do it in your state. Yeah. Did you see people take that up and start driving change in other places?
Yeah, we had a bunch of, I think 12 or 13 states have reached out. North Dakota is working on a similar bill. Indiana, Ohio, Texas, a bunch of different states are working on either standalone bills to this similar effect, or incorporating some of the same language in their existing legislation that they're working on passing for other things.
It's incredible. So now, as you have more opportunity to open these schools, you've got teachers that are potentially really high quality for these micro schools, but you're also trying to scale quickly, which is hard to do while maintaining quality. How do you balance those two?
And the short answer is we're still figuring it out, but the highest conviction we have is to try to continue to hire exceptional teachers. The product is getting quite good. And so over time, the product will actually sort of self-enforce education quality, because we're now getting to the point where basically on a daily basis, we can look at the learning velocity of any student and see how they're performing and how that school is serving them. And so if something's off, we know pretty quickly, and then we can correct. And the product now actually suggests what it thinks is the highest probability correction or resolution for a drop in learning velocity for that student, which is pretty awesome. And so in theory, the teacher doesn't even need to have, eventually, the teacher won't need to have perfect intuition on every issue that a student could have, because the product will be able to sort of infer what the most likely issue is, and then be able to say, hey, this is probably the correct remedy for this issue. But sort of as we're still, as Primer OS is still, being fine tuned and we're still improving it, having really high quality teachers is still the best way to ensure the quality the parents want, especially on the things outside of academics. So, how the school's run and, the culture of the school and the vibe when the kids come in and all that, that's all going to be dictated by the quality of the team.
It's incredible. How will you know if Primer has succeeded? 5 years from now, you're looking back. What does the world look like?
I don't think we will have succeeded for a lot longer than that. The internal goal for our leadership team is to have a Primer within 30 minutes of 80% of the kids in the US. So that's going to take a lot longer than 5 years. But I do think if we get to the point where we can, for a teacher who is inspired to launch a school to serve their community, if we get to the point where those teachers can reliably launch the new school in 4, 6, 8 weeks, regardless of what state they're in, regardless of where they live, and the cost of that education it makes it affordable to every family, regardless of income, whether they live in a state with, a state scholarship or private scholarships or private foundations or whatever it may be. That will be how I know that we are on the path to fully fulfilling the vision, but it'll take a lot longer than 5 years to fully get there.
It's a very exciting vision. When you think about getting to that place, 30 minutes of 88% of students in the US?
80% is what we
80%. That means a lot of growth. How will you reach those students? Is it primarily through teachers, or are there other growth levers as well?
We don't know for a lot of new states, we won't know, but currently, yes, teachers are the primary mechanism that drive a lot of the expansion, because they are the ones that want to launch the schools, and they're the ones that come to us and say, hey, I want to launch a Primer in Orlando or Atlanta or Austin or Dallas or Fort Worth or Houston or wherever. And so they're driving a lot of the growth.
Which is interesting to see the similarity between, on the surface, very different industries, education and Gumroad, more of the sales and creator ecosystem and this sort of thing, but actually quite similar. In both cases, you are facilitating someone else wanting to do that sale. They bring in the person and you help them. How have you found across your career on all 3 different companies that are facilitating entrepreneurs, what are the consistent themes that have stood out to you in terms of what makes a successful entrepreneur?
And to ask these questions, I'm not good at the like sort of generalist truisms. When I'm investing in founders, I look for founders who I think could conceivably be doing their life's work, solving whatever problem they're going after solving. It's extremely simple. So I'm looking for an exceptionally talented person who has some unique insight about the world. And, conceivably you could see them working on this for the next 15 years. Beyond that, I think great founders come in all shapes and sizes and all different backgrounds. And I don't know that there's other, at least generalizable, sort of truisms beyond that. Or if there are, I haven't discovered them.
That's wonderful. When you look at this work in regulated industry that's gone very well so far, if some other founder is working in healthcare or some other industry that's very regulated, what do you think are the misconceptions they may have that keep them from even starting?
I mean, education is not that regulated. There's a very clear framework for launching schools. It just happened to be pretty convoluted in one state that we were operating in, so we had to fix it. Certainly healthcare and financial services are way more regulated than education. I guess the main insight that I have now on this side of Primer is that it is really important to understand where the incentives lie in the industry. And I don't think I realized how I thought I understood how opposed the traditional system would be to us and how willing they would be to attack and try to encumber us. But I was off by an order of magnitude, and I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't have affected whether or not I started the business, but I do think I do wish I would have been a little bit more clear-eyed, and I probably would have done things differently early on if I had fully understood that. And I think I didn't totally understand the incentive structure as well as I do now.
That is fair. And that brings us to our lightning round. I'll throw out a couple of very short questions. Feel free to give a brief answer, go into more detail, up to you. First question, marketing to parents or marketing to teachers?
Teachers.
Mixed age classrooms or traditional grade levels?
Mixed age classrooms.
Former founders or career educators?
Former founders.
Growth through teacher referrals or direct parent marketing?
I'll go teacher referrals, but I have a love for both.
User-generated content or polished brand content?
I think I'm going to go contrarian on this one based on where I think you want me to go. I'll take polished brand content. I think we're past peak UGC. We're headed back to high quality brand content.
The pendulum swings. Community-driven growth or sales-driven growth?
I'm tempted to go contrarian on this too, but I'll go community.
Category creation or market disruption?
I think market disruption is underrated because everyone tries to create new categories now, and we need more people taking on old, stodgy industries that everyone thinks can't be changed and being willing to take a real crack at fixing them.
Which is exactly what you're doing. And with that, where can people go to learn more about you and about Primer?
Primer.com. If you know any great teachers in your life that are interested in launching a school in their area, I would be very excited to chat with them. They can sign up on the website or email me, r@primer.com. If you are a teacher, and you want to start a school, love to chat with you. And then, we're at Primer on socials.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Nate.